Hi everybody, Adrian Plass here.
Yes, and Bridget. Hello.
And we've had another odd week, haven't we, in some ways?
Yeah, well, we're number 175 in Sound in the Shallows, aren't we?
We are.
And we can't think of any particular significance about that, except that the world is in such a terrible place that maybe we'll remember this period in the future.
Yeah.
Hopefully with something or other resolved, but what a mess.
And one of the most difficult things is the truth, isn't it? I mean, just through the week, the things that have happened with everybody claiming somebody else has done whatever has happened.
Yeah.
And it being really, really difficult to know who to listen to, who to believe.
Yes, I mean, I think last week we were talking a bit about people searching through the rubble, trying to find just something that would remind them of home, and to some extent it's like that with the truth, isn't it? It's like we're searching through the rubble to try to think, well, where is the truth? Who is saying the truth? Who really knows what is happening?
Well, coupled with all that, of course, we've been working all week with a group of people in a hotel, actually, for the week, which has been, that's been very nice. But everything that's happened is in the shadow of what's happening politically and internationally. And we've actually been talking all week about Elijah, who is who is described as one of the major prophets in the Old Testament. And
it has been rather ironic, really, hasn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, the story of Elijah is set against a period of history where things were in a total and chaotic mess. I mean, the king at the center of the problem is described as the most wicked king that ever there was, married to Jezebel, who we all know because is very wicked indeed. But
the word Jezebel has its own particular
ring.
It's
a real ring to it. And the more you read about her, the stronger the ring gets, really and truly. But it's a muddle and a mess.
Well, it's more of a mess because most faiths, and Christianity is no exception, like to deal in absolutes. They like things to be shaped properly and to be able to talk about them in a way that suggests you know what you're talking about and what's involved. The thing about Elijah, which is perhaps interesting at the moment, when we could do with some real prophets, people who are really speaking out, is that he was such an extraordinary mixture of things. If you think, I mean, people who know about characters like Daniel in the Bible,
he was so solid, wasn't he? Really, from a young man onwards.
He was intellectually and morally very sound, and it wasn't vacillating. What happens, really quite alarmingly, with Elijah, is that he's totally confident and incredibly effective when God is working through him and in him. But when that is not happening, he appears to be quite a frightened and insecure sort of character. And I remember once when we talked about this somewhere, someone said to me, don't you think it's just the devil lying to Elijah about it? But when you read the story, which we've done all the way through this week, he isn't. He was the man who would do what he was told because he learned that God would do it, whatever he said. But once the hands of God were off the reins, as it were, in his life, he seemed to find life very difficult. And that makes for a very strange story, doesn't it?
Yes, I mean, we were actually laughing just a wee bit, if it's possible to laugh at the moment, about the fact that we remembered that in the 80s, a lot of us were singing about the Spirit of the Lord being within our hearts. Well, that's fine, because we do know that Jesus did give the Holy Spirit to the whole world. But at the time of Elijah, the Spirit of the Lord was a pretty scary thing, and God could put it on and take it off whenever he wanted to. I mean, we know it was taken away from Saul.
Given to Saul,
taken away.
Yeah,
but we were singing in the 80s in our leisure centre, the safety of our leisure centre, when the Spirit of the
That's
Lord
where our
is...
church met.
Yes,
That's
yes.
the point of that.
But when the Spirit of the Lord is within our hearts, we can dance as David danced, which we all found very funny, because once we realised that David was actually naked, it added a little something to the whole song.
Well, it made us think the services might become more interesting if we did start doing
But actually it was a little bit silly.
Yeah.
The Spirit of the Lord that Jesus left is to be within us, to guide us into being more caring, more compassionate, more... The Spirit of the Lord as described in something like Elijah is, I mean, we used two images, didn't we? You used the image of the quartermaster.
Well, I think that is what Elijah was in a way. A quartermaster, of course, within the forces is the man who deals out equipment and stuff to the soldiers or airmen. And to put it simply, the stuff comes in through one window and he gives it out through another, and he's responsible for making sure...
And the other image is of the postman.
Yeah, that postman who he doesn't write the letters.
You don't write the letters.
He just delivers them.
You are supposed to deliver them to the address where they're intended to go. And in a way, that's what the great prophets were supposed to do.
Well, that's the great thing about Elijah, that although he was flawed and he had a lot of fear in him, he did do what he was told to do. He did say what he was told to say, even sometimes in the midst of great fear. I mean, this man Ahab was incredibly powerful, the king, and
very childish, which is always very dangerous. Yeah.
And the most dangerous thing about him, in a way, was that he believed in the same God as Elijah. What I mean by that is that he'd seen evidence that when Elijah said something, it happened. Yes. And so when Elijah came to visit him, for instance, on one occasion, Ahab said, "You are a very bad and dangerous man." Elijah said, "You are the dangerous man."
Yes.
And at that point, he could have brought 1,000 men to kill Elijah.
Yeah.
But his hand was absolutely stayed because he knew this God, of which he knew nothing himself, was absolutely real and present. So Elijah did do what he was told to do. He did the next thing
until the point where actually God had performed extraordinary miracles through him. And the story of what happened on Mount Carmel with the two sets of bull pieces set on two piles of wood, and the idea being that only the true God would be able to set fire to these sacrifices without lighting a fire. And in fact, Elijah dug a ditch, didn't he, around his pile of 12 stones to represent the 12 tribes of Israel, and then poured water all over the lot so that the ditches were full of water, just to make sure there was absolutely no doubt about the fire. And of course God brings and
then he challenged the priests of Baal to get their God to light it, and they went berserk trying to make their God operate. And
that did cause us pause for thought at that point, didn't it? As we looked at it this week, we thought, how often have we tried to manipulate God just by going through a whole system of different prayers or a whole system of different behaviours? It's not that far away from leaping around and trying to get Baal.
It happens all the time, and we might have mentioned it before. Someone wrote to us saying, God doesn't seem to be in my life, and I've tried all the whatnots.
The whatnots.
And I was very grateful to her, because I couldn't think what to call all these things. And what it means is that we developed all sorts of systems and procedures that are supposed to twist God's arm up behind his back, or in some way make him do the things that you want. But because the actions of God they're not random, but they're not within our understanding of what is needed or required. It just doesn't happen like that. No. But that's right. We are not a million miles from there.
It did make us pause for a little while. It's so, and that's why it's so complex at the moment, because who is right, who is wrong, who is good, who is bad. Well, we know some things are bad. Like I say, the spirit that Jesus said he was going to leave for us was in order for us to have the mind of Christ, the heart of Christ, the compassion, the love of Christ. And there's no doubt that there's some really horrendous things happening that could never be attributed to Jesus in any way or any shape or form. So it is different, but at the same time it did make us think. And then of course there is the massive miracle and the fire leaps up. But then of course, unless we edit the Bible, we have to face that violence is in the Bible as well. All the 450 prophets were slaughtered.
Oh, it's horrible, yeah.
So horrible things have always happened. But I think it's been an interesting week to follow in the safety of where we are.
We were very struck by the moment when Elijah became the sort of Michael Fish of the period.
It's not fair.
Is Michael Fish? Was
it is Michael Fish, but
who said that was it a hurricane that happened in the 70s wasn't going to happen, or 80s wasn't going to happen, and it did. And Elijah goes to Ahab and says it's going to rain, and the significance of that is there's been no rain for a long time, and Elijah,
for a very long
time, and Elijah is absolutely certain, as he says it, that this is a message from God saying there is going to be rain. But as soon as he leaves Ahab, and Ahab, there's two desires. One is that it won't rain, because then everyone will lose their belief in Elijah and therefore in God. And the other is that it will rain, because then there'll be rain in the country, and it will crops will grow and everything will be okay again. But then, as we've said, this strange character, we have Elijah sitting on the mountain, no sight of rain, and he's got his servant with him. And he says to the servant, go and stand up there and watch the sky and tell me as soon as you see anything that might indicate it's going to rain. And the servant comes back 7 times with Elijah, whether Elijah kept saying, well, what? And the servant says, there is nothing. And I was saying this week, maybe Elijah wanted to say, well, make something up then. I can't stand it. And finally, after the 7th time, the servant comes very excitedly back down the mountain and says, there's a tiny cloud the size of a man's hand in the sky. I think it's going to rain. And then it rains. And so those first few words said to Ahab are absolutely clear. He was confident. He said it. After that, he hoped he got it right. I mean, I wouldn't mind having a prophet who's a bit feeble and weak in between his prophecies. We could have someone who's strong and authentic and would really pass things on in that way.
Yes, I mean, there's that we do want people who are in charge of things to not have any weaknesses, which is rubbish, because there is no such person. But that's what we kind of want. And of course, as we go on with the story of Elijah, and Elijah having had enough, having then been given a little cake and a drink by the angel.
We haven't got there yet. Elijah hears that Jezebel, after this incredible thing on the mountain, Jezebel sends a message saying, whatever else happens, I'm going to kill you.
Yes, yeah.
And he runs away.
Yeah.
He's absolutely terrified. He's just seen God do something absolutely incredible.
Extraordinary.
And now he's running to hide. And he gets to a broom tree in the desert, and he sits under the tree. And he says the words that I have to say I have said a few times in my life regarding my so-called Christian life, and most of us have. He says, I've had enough. I've had enough. And when you think about it, it's not surprising he's had enough. He's had enough of being himself, and I know that
dragging himself along everywhere, because that's what we all do. We have to take ourselves with us, don't we?
Just at the moment, I mean, I find, for all sorts of reasons, I find myself very difficult to drag around. But I still I love the idea that specific work is available for us to do. But yeah, he sits under the thingy.
And this is so important, isn't it? He says to God, I've had enough. And God does not say to him, well, wait, God does not say to him, well, what do you mean you've had enough? What God does is send him a little cake.
Well, hold on, he hasn't got there yet either. He falls asleep. When he wakes up, there's a man there who says, you must be very hungry and thirsty. I've cooked some bread for you, and I've got some water for you.
Yeah.
And Elijah, probably really taken aback, as anyone would be, some stranger appearing in the middle of nowhere and producing a barbecue, obviously eats it and drinks it, and then he falls asleep again, doesn't he?
Yes, it's interesting that. I've thought about that quite a lot, because after he's woken again, he then eats and drinks again, and then has a job to do again. He's got to go somewhere and do something. But sometimes we don't really allow people to stop. There's something about that deep sleep that Elijah goes into, a feeling of being looked after, a feeling that nothing is demanded of him at that point but for him to eat and drink, that first deep sleep. There's no rush in that. There's no sense of a rush, is there? There's no sense of a demand. What he's being asked to do is to stop just for a little while. And I'm not sure whether we're always quite as caring as that kind voice.
I don't know if we're as caring to ourselves as we ought to be.
No.
When it comes to believing that we deserve sometimes to have a break from the tensions and pressures that we're living under,
and to be able to say, I've had enough.
Yeah, to say I've had enough, and at that point not to be too bothered whether you do anything again. But
that's when you need a bit of TLC, isn't it? Tender, loving kindness, whether it's in the form of a jar of water and a little cake, or
whatever,
or just kindness, just understanding that for the time being you've had enough.
I was talking about our son this week, and how occasionally he used to get very cross with me. He was good at getting cross.
He was very small.
Yeah, he got very cross sometimes. He used to climb on my lap, and then he was only little, and he'd bash my chest with his little fists, and he'd say, hey you, hey you, hey you, and then he'd burst into tears, and then he'd fall asleep, and I'd cuddle him. And I think what a lot of people need, precisely that, don't they? That they don't understand what's going on, they can't handle it. They need to express those feelings as loudly and vociferously as they want to, and then somehow find a cuddle in it.
Yeah, and that
prepares you for something.
If we're going into our present situation, if ever there was a people who needed fresh water and a little cake, whatever form that was in, humanitarian aid, the news is intolerable. We cannot bear it because we can't change it. We can't do what that angel did for Elijah in that sense. So it's not just praying, it's finding any way that we possibly can, isn't it, to support any humanitarian efforts.
The other thing that Elijah has reminded me of, certainly, is voices.
Yeah?
Voices, because at the moment all we hear are loud voices and explosions and bangs from rifles and bombs. And
blame flying around like missiles as well.
And Elijah goes, as probably most people know, goes to a cave where he's told to go by
40
God.
miles
40 days away.
40 days, I mean, yeah.
And he hides just at the entrance to the cave, and God puts on this spectacular display of thunder and lightning and fire and all this stuff, but he's not in the fire, he's not in the lightning, he's not in the loud noises. And then, right at the end of that, Elijah hears a still small voice. And it's a gentle voice. And we can't possibly know, but maybe that voice was the same voice as the man who gave him the bread and the water as he sat under that broom tree in the desert.
Well, the interesting thing, of course, is that at that point that voice says, "Why are you here, Elijah?" and gives Elijah a chance to actually, rather like Jesus said, this is what you do. You go into your room and you talk to your father. And Elijah, if you like, goes into his room and talks to his father. I mean, he says, "I've tried my best, I've done it, and it's awful, and now they want to kill me, and it's just me." And that loneliness is what cries out to God at that point, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a loneliness that we hear in a lot of people, isn't it? I've done my best, and I'm so tired, and it's just me. And God gives him a friend.
Well, we'd love to hear, I mean, a small, wise voice that has absolute authority breaking into this situation at the moment.
Oh, we would.
In the middle of all the noise, to say, hold on a minute, hold on. But it's very difficult to know where is the authority, which is the voice you listen to. How do we bring comfort to people who are starving, dying, going through hell because of what people in power are doing to them, whatever that power happens to be.
Yeah. Well, we've got to keep going into our room, and we've got to keep praying, and we've got to do the next thing. Elijah did the next thing, and if there is a next thing that we can do, if there is a charity that we are supporting that we could support, there are things, tiny things, that we can do to bring a jar of water and a little cake. And if there is, then surely...
let's do it. Yeah. No easy answers, still no easy answers, and it's going to be a while before this awful time ends, but let us know how you feel. We'd love to hear.
Goodbye.
And we'll see you next week.